Okay, it's now time for my favorite panel, which is when we find out what's really going on. And to lead us into the future, it's a great pleasure to welcome my colleague and dear friend, Davis Hake, who is Director of Cybersecurity Strategy at Palo Alto Networks. There's one change to the program lineup that's in your book. Lu Chuanying was unable to get here, but he's replaced by Yao Li, who is a senior cyber engineer at CERT, China. So thanks very much, Davis, and the panelists.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. My name is Davis Hake. I'm the Director for Cybersecurity Strategy at Palo Alto Networks. We're one of the newer members of the East-West Institute, but I've been a long-time colleague and friend with Bruce McConnell, and certainly respected all the work that he's done. And his passion for the issue and international cooperation is something that really drew us to this panel. So I want to say thank you on behalf of Palo Alto Networks for having us here and let us be involved in the conversation. So my background is specifically in cybersecurity policy. I was lucky enough to spend 6 years on the Hill working for members of Congress on cyber policy. And at that time, one of the most fun that I had was leading our Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus. And this was a great opportunity because, being able to use the bully pulpit of the U.S. Congress, I was able to drag in whoever I wanted, who'd ever be willing to speak to us in a private closed-door session to have a conversation with staffers. So it wouldn't be with the members, it would be with the staff-level working groups, really in the trenches, and kind of give us the real, no dirt, no kidding, their viewpoint on what was actually going on in cyber. And this was critical because at this level on the Hill, for people that haven't seen it, it's incredible. I mean, you're basically having 25 up through 35-year-olds making, million-dollar, massive political decisions and advice to their boss. And it's an incredible amount of people, an incredible community to be able to provide that youth and that new perspective and optimism into tackling these ideas. And so I'm really also happy now to be able to kind of bring a little of this flavor back with this youth cyber panel. And we have with us today some incredibly talented and hardworking cyber leaders that we're maybe going to be able to get a little bit of that behind the scenes, down in the trenches type feel here. As we all know, it's great masters like Bruce and Andy Purdy and others that chart this beautiful vision for where we need to go in the future. But then, at the end of the day, it's folks like this that end up writing the papers. So hopefully we're going to end up doing some discussions and hearing what their views on the whole conference and a few other topics we have to talk about. So on the panel today, we have Astrid Schut-Ceballos. She's a research assistant at RAND. We have Oleg Demidov. He's a consultant with PIR Center in Moscow. We have Joanna Shovatska. Close enough, I apologize. And she is the program director for cybersecurity at the Kozytsky Institute. And then we have Yao Li, who is with the China National CERT. So I'm going to pass it on down to our different panelists to provide a little bit more background on what they're working on. But I'd also like to ask you guys, looking at the conference over the past 2 days, I would ask that you guys pick out an individual session or panel that's most relevant to the work that you guys are doing, and then talk about what you learned from that panel and what's a concrete next step that you're going to take in implementing lessons learned.
Hi, I'm Astrid Schut-Ceballos. As Davis said, thank you very much, Davis, for introducing all of us, and thank you, Bruce, for inviting us to be here. This is really an honor and something I'm very excited to do. At RAND, I've worked mostly on US-China relations. That's my background. I got my degree in East Asian Studies, and I've been focusing in my time at RAND on a lot of things having to do with social media in China, and also on a few projects related to how we might be able to revive cyber dialogue between the US and China. So I've found our discussions in the past day or two really enlightening and hopefully encouraging for that prospect. In particular, I really enjoyed the session on governing the internet yesterday afternoon, and also the discussion this morning about the internet and the state. The main point that's come out of this for me, and perhaps this might seem obvious to a lot of you who have been working on this much longer than I have, is that the internet is quite different from a lot of other areas in which we've already developed successful global governance regimes and laws say, the law of the sea, the law of armed conflict. And I think this difference comes from the information or content aspect of the internet. That's where some of the most intractable disagreements appear to lie. I think Bertrand de la Chapelle noted this earlier, that there's a distinction between governing the technical infrastructure of the internet and governing the use of the internet, which I thought was really a very succinct way to put this difference. And I think this insight is central to a lot of the discussions we've had here the past 2 days, and also for me, for the kind of progress that we might be able to make in the US-China relationship in particular. It's given me a new lens for thinking about the kind of differences of opinion the US and China might have regarding norms in cyberspace, and what we can maybe expect, what kind of progress we can expect to make in resolving some of those differences, most of which I think fall into the second category of governing behavior on the internet. That seems to be the more contentious realm. So in terms of applying that to my work on how to revive the cyber dialogue between the two countries, again, I think we perhaps need to have modest expectations. Maybe that's not the most optimistic thing to say, but you know, in my discussions with some people thinking about this issue in China, they constantly bring up this idea of building trust, confidence building measures, these kinds of things. So I think that's where we need to start, and I think we need to find a way to not let our differences of opinion derail dialogue, because when dialogue ends, there's really no way to make further progress.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Davis, thank you for introducing me, and thank you to everyone in East-West Institute for the opportunity to be here and to speak for this distinguished audience. I already had several chances to introduce myself previously, including yesterday as interpreter of Mr. Robert Schlegel. However, it's not my basic occupation. Actually, I'm a consultant with PIR Center, as Davis said. PIR Center was founded 20 years ago to deal with the issues of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And 5 years ago, its agenda was diversified, and it started to include the issues of cyber policy and the issues of global internet governance, just because this agenda has become as important as the issues of weapons of mass destruction and their non-proliferation and disarmament. They say often that cyber is the new nuclear now for the global security and for the international relations, and I fully agree with that. Of course, there were many sessions which were interesting for me, but there were two particular important and particular fruitful for me. The first one was the session on governing and managing the internet yesterday, where I was speaking. And one particular moment that I noticed for myself from the session is that while the trend of these days is to focus more on something which Dr. de la Chapelle absolutely correctly called governance on the internet, which is about policies and social, economic aspects of international relations, of international regulations and policy norms related to digital world. There is something much to be done, and there is something much to be discussed about the infrastructure. And this is the aspect which is important for me, because global internet infrastructure is the core of the network, is the basis of the all endless and bottomless opportunities we have now. And there are challenges in this field. And I realized that we have to pay more attention to that. First, to the key challenge of keeping the internet running in a stable, secure, and resilient manner, and to articulate, to aggregate it, is a prime goal of the technical community now. The prime goal of the internet governance in its narrow sense, in its old-fashioned sense, where there was a bunch of organizations of purely technical communities several decades ago. This task is still on the table. Second, we need to adapt, we need to look more on the perspective infrastructure challenges, like the infrastructure challenges and security challenges of such thing as the Internet of Things, which is coming as a new global reality now, and brings its own security implications, new vulnerabilities, and new dangers to ordinary user. I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. And the second session, which was very interesting for me, was today, and it was not a session, it was a keynote address by Mr. Scott Johnny from Microsoft, yeah. There was one particular important thesis there. We need to talk on very hard and sensitive issues like offensive norms. And it was surprising for me that it was representatives of the private sector to talk about that. And it's a very important idea that private sector brings the costs of the geopolitical games related to cyber warfare and related to offensive behavior in cyberspace. That's why they need to talk about that. And I would like to support this thesis very much because I have some experience, some personal experience with that regard. I know people from a very large industrial facility located near my native town, Kaluga. It's in the central Russia. And I wouldn't call the name of the company, but I have a friend who is a network administrator there, and he told me that several years ago they found Stuxnet in their internal corporate networks. It was passive because it wasn't able to detect that particular type of controller, which he was designed for, to identify it and then to launch this cyber sabotage cycle as he did in Natanz in Iran. There was no such kind of equipment in this facility, but still the virus disseminated itself across the whole network of the whole plant, and it was very difficult to root it out. It was not enough to relaunch the operating system, it was not enough to reinstall it. They needed to buy new equipment. This is cost as well. And the industry should talk about that. The industry should bring it to the table, even when not all governments are ready to speak about that now, because we have some fragile but going on dialogue on defensive norms. That's great. But offensive norms should be discussed as well, and I strongly support this thesis, and I'm very glad that it was pronounced, it was stated here. So I'm going to work on both these tracks, on governing and managing the internet, to continue my cooperation with East West Institute on this track. And I'm also going together with my colleagues from Peer Center to highlight more the issue of the need for regulation of offensive norms when I come back to Moscow. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joanna Świątkowska. I represent the Kościuszko Institute. Thank you, Bruce, for having me here today. Being a part of this panel not only makes me a leader, but also makes me young. So anyway, I represent the Kościuszko Institute, which is a non-governmental organization based in Poland. I am responsible for the projects related to cybersecurity. The main aim of our work is to create recommendations for Polish government, so that will help our decision makers to ensure cybersecurity within our country, but also within the region. And currently also I hold the position of the program director at European Cybersecurity Forum, which is our flagship initiative and which will take place in September this year. So coming back to your question, I mean, it's extremely hard to choose which session was the most important one. I mean, we've heard a lot of very interesting voices, but here I would like to focus on the comments that particularly draw my attention. During various sessions, we could hear some very strong state-centric remarks, which in my opinion underestimated a little bit the role and the importance of non-state actors, non-state stakeholders. And I would like to warn a little bit against such way of thinking, and let me explain why. In my opinion, it is extremely crucial to understand that in case of cyberspace, old-fashioned top-down approaches the solutions will simply won't work. I mean, traditional concepts need to be reframed, and states cannot act alone. So, due to the nature of cyberspace itself, we need to look for more network solutions where well-coordinated cooperation among different stakeholders will be established. And when I'm speaking about different stakeholders, of course, I mean business, academia, civil society, NGOs, etc. So, because let's not forget that cyberspace gave a huge power to these entities. So now they can influence reality in a way that was not possible before, and it can have extremely strong consequences. So we have to remember about that. And the lesson learned for me out of these panels is that maybe we as a civil society, because I represent the NGO, maybe we should work stronger to prove all the people, also decision makers, that our work is important and equally valid. So thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yao Li. I'm an engineer from CNCERT. And firstly, I'd like to give a brief introduction of our organization. CNCERT is a cybersecurity technical center, and it's the key coordination center for China's cybersecurity emergency response community. So, CNCERT strives to improve national cybersecurity awareness and protect critical infrastructures, and also respond to cybersecurity incidents. We discover threats and incidents by proactive detection and by sharing information with our partners, and also by receiving reports from the public. And we respond to these incidents and also coordinate the organizations to handle them. And every year, we handle thousands of incidents around the whole China. And we also provide services like cybersecurity threat early warning, or cybersecurity posture analysis, and also security evaluation. And this is my first time to attend the summit. Thank you, Bruce. And I say the summit has invited many people from government, from industry, from universities, and all research institutions. And also, I had a lot of ideas and opinions about network management, police, or trust-building measures, and so on. And these ideas are very fresh and are interesting because I focus on technical things. So I think these things are very good, and I have a lot to learn. And I also I'm interested in the session of protecting critical infrastructures, and I see EWI has done a lot of work on it. In this book, they proposed 5 questions about how to protect critical infrastructures. I think they're very good, and they're vital. Also, we try to find out the answers to this question too, but it's not so easy. So we are still on the way too. So thank you. That's it.
No, thank you. So it's interesting because we've heard a lot of overlap, but also from everybody on the panel, kind of talking about that you're facing and you're seeing direct challenges and roadblocks you're working on. And one of the things that I think that the summit has kind of coalesced around a lot is this idea of critical infrastructure, and this idea of how do we create a safe space on the internet for where the internet touches things that could affect the health and safety of civilians, and where do we look at either building norms defensively or norms offensively, Oleg, as you mentioned. And some of the efforts to do that are confidence building measures. You both discussed that. And then the role of policy experts in helping shape those in NGOs. But the reality is that we've been talking about norms, and we've been talking about we previously, like you said, it's the new nuclear, right? I mean, this is an issue that is new for its scope, but not new in the level of effort that we as a policy community have addressed. We've spent decades planning for keeping countries from going to nuclear war. We've spent decades building these types of relationships, either bilateral or multilateral, to solve these problems. you would think that these frameworks and these existing mechanisms would already be in place to solve some of the roadblocks that we're running into. But clearly it's not, and especially around the issue of critical infrastructure. And if it's such an easy problem, I guess my question to the panel is, why haven't we solved it? Why haven't we been able to use the same types of strategies, relationships, working groups to address the issue of keeping civilian critical infrastructure off the table, especially in peacetime? What are the roadblocks that you guys have seen, and how do we fix them? Can we?
Should I go first?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. I have 2 points. One point I think better addresses this question of how can we address roadblocks, and the other is just kind of an observation from one of the discussions I attended yesterday. So I'll start with the discussion point. In the breakthrough group on norms on on restraint in cyber armaments yesterday, there was this idea of creating a forum for promoting these kinds of norms, which I thought was really interesting because I've done some work on how that happens, how norm adoption occurs. And I saw this as kind of an application of that kind of research on norm adoption and diffusion, talking about the role of epistemic communities, transnational civil society advocacy networks in trying to promote that process in the most important states in the system and in the existing sort of multi-stakeholder governance structures. But I had kind of a question about this that may be seen as sort of an obstacle. There was this idea that norm adoption, that we might be able to speed up or accelerate norm adoption. And again, I guess this doesn't come out as quite optimistic, but I just wanted to express some skepticism about how possible that might be. In some of the discussions yesterday, one of the things that became clear to me is that, again, cyberspace is different from some of these other realms where we already have successful prohibition or restrictions, those kind of regimes. For example, there's the norm against the use of chemical weapons or anti-personnel landmines or even the nuclear taboo that you mentioned that we've developed since the 1940s. And I think all of these 3 cases bear 2 commonalities. The first is that in each of these cases, the nature of the armament or the weapon was clear, right? You can point to it, you can identify it, you know what it looks like, you know what it is. And the second thing that's common among the 3 is that the physical damage to human lives was also acute and clear. The humanitarian, the civilian impact, not just the potential military or economic impact of these weapons was clear. And for these reasons, I think that transnational civil society groups like the Forum that we were discussing yesterday, they were able to make a lot of headway. They were much more effective and persuasive in educating, mobilizing domestic publics to be aware of the dangers of these weapons, and therefore in being able to teach and convince governments to do something to adopt and formalize norms about prohibiting the use of these weapons. But I think from what I've heard, it seems like cyberspace is pretty different from these cases. Yesterday, someone was talking about how we even lack a clear definition of what constitutes a cyber weapon or armament. There's not really much agreement on that. And even though we've talked about how civilians have had their personal data stolen, there's still not this visceral impact of cyber weapons or attacks on human life as we saw in the other 3 cases. So I think maybe we do need something new. It seems like this method of having a transnational civil society network to generate, publicly disseminate information on the dangers of cyber armaments might not be as effective as we've seen in previous cases. Although personally, I think it's a great idea, and I'm really hopeful it'll work. It sounds fantastic. And I have one other major point that is kind of related. It goes back to the idea of reviving dialogue between the U.S. and China on cyber norms. Scott Charney mentioned this morning that it's unlikely that you can get a meaningful norm if China and Russia, and arguably a lot of other actors, aren't at the table. And yesterday at the panel, a lot of people remarked that, for governing the internet, a few people remarked that it was the first time they'd seen speakers from India, Russia, and Brazil all on the same panel talking about this idea, having representatives from such a diverse and important range of state actors. I don't think that the importance of bringing actors from these countries together can be overstated. They have the majority of internet users in the world. It's really, really important, and we need to be in dialogue with actors like China on these kinds of issues. And that means we need to figure out one of the main problems in the US-China relationship, and that's how we can deal with tensions and disagreements, perhaps even things that go beyond that, in the cyber relationship in ways that don't have unintended negative consequences for progress in cyber cooperation. This also relates a little bit to the question of enforcement. How can we enforce norms or what we'd like to see happen in cyberspace in ways that are effective and not counterproductive, that don't shut down the dialogue? I'm thinking, for example, of the indictments of PLA officers last year, and I believe it was Chris Painter yesterday who mentioned the possibility of sanctions being used in the future, economic sanctions being used for similar types of purposes. And with the indictments, we saw that as soon as they happened, dialogue shut down, and it hasn't really been revived. And it's not clear what the next steps are to make that happen, to make everyone come back to the table. So I would just raise a question, I guess. What is the chance that sanctions would work? What other methods do we have of enforcement once we do agree upon norms, I guess? How can we, even if we can establish a regime, how can we make sure that it's actually effective and we can enforce it?
Yeah, thank you. And I think we'll jump around a little bit too, because you raised some very interesting points. And Yao-Lin, I served in a similar capacity to you. I was with the Department of Homeland Security, specifically on the team that works on protecting critical infrastructure. And what we found was that we could oftentimes work as scientist to scientist across national boundaries, or as almost like doctor to doctor type relationship, without the larger geopolitical issues kind of clouding that. So I wanted to pose the same question that I asked, but to you to hear as well, to provide some viewpoint as a first responder yourself, and as an engineer and scientist yourself on the potential for using technical relationships as a way to maybe address some of these other issues.
Okay, and maybe I can share what CENSOT has done this year about this area. And I know that there will be a very long time for us to discuss or to reach a consensus on how to protect critical infrastructure. But since attacks exist now, so we face many practical problems now. So for years, CENSOT has done something on it. We have established a collaboration mechanism with many hundreds of partners, both in China and abroad, including ISPs and domain name restrictors, and also cyber security vendors, and also many other set organizations. And also EWI is one of our partners. And we handled thousands of instances every year. We help government to handle the problems of the websites, like web defacement, vulnerability, or DDoS attack, like so. We also cooperate with many banks in China to help them solve the vulnerabilities of their systems, and also help them handle many phishing websites or fake mobile apps like that. I think our work has truly made a positive impact on the system's security. We not only provide technical measures, but also help them to be aware of that, how important to protect the systems, and how much loss could be reduced if they do what we told them to do. Okay, and I think the discussion on this topic will will continue in future for a very long time, I think. Yeah, but the set organizations and the technical teams who manage these systems should be involved, I think, because they can. We can provide some advices in terms of the best practices and also the technical measures which we have conducted. Yeah, I think so. Maybe that's what we can do. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Joanna, do you want to go?
Of course. So I would like to focus on the critical infrastructure protection, and the answer, or my comment or advice, if you will, to your question would be that maybe we should consider to take a step back. And what I mean by saying that is that, of course, I truly believe that the global solutions are extremely needed, especially I can see the importance of CBMs and other similar solutions. However, in order to find practical solutions, in my opinion, we should go back a little bit and take a look at the smaller picture. I mean, why don't we talk about our national solutions? Why don't we share our good practices, recommendations, our experience, lessons learned, and by gathering this knowledge and implementing it, I believe that this is the one way of increasing overall security. For example, let's share our experiences in terms of private-public cooperation, effective one. Why don't we share our experiences in terms of incentives for business, so it will be more engaged in information sharing? There is plenty of our areas where we can cooperate, and I believe that once we will have this solid fundamentals background at our national level, then we can shift towards more global solutions. So maybe we should just look at this small perspective for a moment.
No, thank you. That's very interesting. Oleg?
Okay, so briefly 3 points on the topic of critical infrastructure and the possible ways to achieve progress in that field internationally. First, understand the limitations. There are many infrastructure segments and niches where the opportunities and the corridor of opportunities for international cooperation is quite limited. We need to understand that. Take, for example, peaceful nuclear infrastructure. When dealing with protecting digital components of information systems installed at peaceful nuclear objects, we need to understand that there are many decades of the school of physical nuclear security, which provides quite little room for international cooperation. And it's very conservative. It takes into account many risks, including those of information systems and industrial control systems installed at that object, and there are limitations. The second kind of limitations is that first governments and expert communities might arrive to some kind of consensus or agreement on norms which are above the threshold of a conflict. That's what we are witnessing now, that the progress on the UNGG is achieved on the situations which are above the threshold, because this is most evident, this is most easy to agree upon, though it's difficult as well. Only then we will be able to see the gradual process on expanding this room of consensus to the situations and cyber attacks which are below the threshold. This is work that needs to be done, but it would take much time. There were initiatives. For example, there was an initiative which was thrown in the discussion in the UNGGE by the Russian side, by the way, to agree on, to arrive to a political non-binding norm on not to attack the infrastructure of the banking sector, the information systems of banks and financial companies and other critical financial infrastructure like the stock exchanges. That didn't work for the moment, but this is a very good option for the future. But now, at this stage of the dialogue, we probably can agree on the issues which are above the threshold, like armed attack on cyberspace and the applicability of the UN Charter Article 2, Paragraph 4, illegal use of force with regard to cyberspace and so on. Only then we can talk on the issues below the threshold, because it's not so obvious in terms of international law. And finally, the third point is quite cynical. Sometimes things start to change only when we face a disaster. And Stuxnet was not a disaster in terms of broad public opinion. Only experts and only people from the industry understood its true meaning. For an average user of the internet, it is nothing. He doesn't understand the importance of the fact that we are facing situations with the critical infrastructure which might create immediate threat to life. And this is going to change because we're going to have self-driving cars and they will be hacked. It's not a question, it's just a matter of time. And we will have situations, what was called, I don't know, cyber Pearl Harbor and so on. And then, whether we want it or not, there would be much more public attention to this topic. But it would be good, it would be great if we can handle these things before we have this disaster. But I don't know whether it is possible or not. I only know that this is going to change and we are going to have much more public debates and much more interest from average users to this topic, to critical infrastructure, because very soon we will have, all of us, each of us will have critical IT infrastructure surrounding him, because you will have your car, your equipment at home as critical infrastructure saturated with smart connections, with sensors and so on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Kind of along the lines of that question, you know, you guys are at the beginning of your careers right now. You know, we're all looking at the issues that we have focused on us today. But I wanted to ask, you know, looking out 10 years, right? Looking out maybe like 20 years, what do you guys see as kind of being the key of what's going to take up the future of your work, right? Is it going to be, you know, issues of sort of digital, like content and privacy or intellectual property, or do you think it's going to be more what Oleg was talking about, more Internet of Things, where the Internet touches, you know, physical systems and critical infrastructure? And then too, I guess I would also ask, does that even matter? I mean, is the future even going to make that distinction? One of the things in Homeland Security where I worked, we had a U.S. computer emergency response team which focused on cyber, digital incidents and attacks, and then we had an industrial control systems team which focused on you know, threats to physical infrastructure that was connected digitally. And you know, a lot of the work that we always discussed was that, you know, it doesn't really make sense to divide up our viewpoints on these, because so much of the digital infrastructure is just as important as the physical infrastructure. And you know, you start getting into maybe there are issues of life and safety, but you certainly get issues of life and safety on the digital side too. So I kind of wanted to ask you guys, you know, your perspective here, looking out in the future, what do you see you guys working on? And where do you kind of see that line on the digital and physical residing in the future?
I guess my answer has less to do with what I might work on and more what I think is feasible, or what I hope will be feasible in the next 10 years. I think that, to me, it seems like there's more room for agreement and perhaps more urgent need for agreement on the protecting critical infrastructure aspect than for thinking about the appropriate relationship for the state to content on the internet at the moment. And in this sense, I think focusing on the critical infrastructure part is the better place to start. That's where we have some clear common interest among nations in restraining attempts to attack critical infrastructure. But yeah, and I think the flip side of that is that the digital information, the content part is will continue to be the most contentious and the most difficult part to deal with, and therefore the most difficult place, I think, in which to make progress. That being said, I think it's the information and content aspect of the internet that gets the most public engagement, that receives by far the most attention in the public sphere. So it's very possible that I will be wrong.
Okay, so I suppose that I probably would still be focused on infrastructure issues and norms related to global and critical infrastructure in the future. And I hope that in 5 or 10 years, as you said, we would have some kind of a productive dialogue and fruitful dialogue on norms for situations below the threshold for peacetime regime, something which is only in the very initial point and initial stage now. And we need to reassess, we need to revision the notion of critical infrastructure with regard to things I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, like Internet of Things penetrating into transport, into all things surrounding us and creating new vulnerabilities alongside with new endless opportunities. And one particularly important thing for me, and I hope that we'll be able to continue my work on that, is designing and bridging the positions of governments, other actors, private industry, on the norms related to the status of the global internet infrastructure itself. Because when they say that cyberspace is a global commons or cyberspace is a public good, it is not exactly correct. The correct thing is that in cyberspace there is a certain type, a certain niche of infrastructure which is a global common and which demands it in legal sense. And this is the Internet's unique identifier system. The bunch of several kinds of infrastructure like the global domain name system, the global number and resource systems, and the catalog of internet protocols. And altogether, this is the Internet Unique Identifier System, and its status, it cannot be divided along national borders. This is global commons in a pure technical engineering sense. And I hope that Peer Center and me will be able to contribute to the future discussion on how do we regard this kind of infrastructure internationally from a legal perspective, how do we gonna work with that from the governmental side and so on. So these are some points which are of interest for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Jonah?
Okay, so I mean, it's very hard to answer your question because I believe that today's predictions will be outdated tomorrow. However, in my opinion, one of the most important questions that we need to answer at the moment is, and it's related to what Oleg said, is how we're gonna respond as an international community to a conflict like a hybrid warfare, which includes cyber elements. And as you can see on the example of Ukrainian conflict, this is extremely important to look for the answer, what is the proportional response to such types of conflicts. Because I believe that this is the most probable area where the conflict can escalate, and then we'll have huge problem. So, I mean, we in my opinion, this is the greatest challenge to look for the solutions for conflicts which are below the threshold of actual cyber armed conflict. So, this is the one example of the future challenges that I would like to mention.
Oh, thank you. Yellen?
Okay. As we know, the internet has become a part of our life and becomes more and more important. And I think the internet has produced many different kinds of data related with our sensitive private information. And like my real name, my address, my credit card number and password, and my interests, where I have my lunch, or where I traveled last month, and so on. So it's called big data, and I had a word that who owns the data and who owns the world. I don't know if it's correct, but I think it shows something. So from one side, big data could help the internet know us better, and so the internet could serve us better. But from the other side, it also causes many problems. So we have already found many personal information leakage problem in China due to the management due to the improper management, and we also found many. We also found many problems of data over collection and data misuses. So I think the problems is particularly serious in mobile internet. Many mobile apps collect our information, but we even don't know that. So I think in future, how to ensure the data could be used correctly and also properly will be a very important issue, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, I'd like to open up. I think we can take a few questions if the panelists are willing. Any takers? Bruce?
So I wondered if the panel has any comments on Admiral Owens's discussion of the singularity about when the machine is as smart or smarter than we are and what the implications are of that.
Technological singularity and artificial intelligence is a very special topic, but one topic which is closely related to that, and it has started to gain practical importance in international discussions 2 years ago, starting from summer of 2013, is the topic of autonomous weapons. It started to be discussed in the United Nations, and when we started to we had a closer look at the topic, there are increasing problems with that, because we do have military programs in a number of leading military powers that imply the development of technological lines of autonomous weapons. First is the drones. Second, these are some submarine autonomous vehicles and those one carrying weapons. Third, there are some ground robots, and well, these programs are becoming more and more sophisticated, and even taking into account, they do not imply real artificial intelligence. They still imply the use of war machines which are able to take decisions to open fire on their own without the necessary intervention of a human operator. This is dangerous because first, it is totally out of the scope of the framework of the international humanitarian law. And this is the prime challenge why the United Nations become interested in that topic. Second, because, well, obviously it might have some serious implications for conflicts in some regions or areas where there is fragile peace, like Nagorno-Karabakh, or to be more realistic, the border area between South and North Korea. And South Korea uses this automated machine guns there already. So there are many things to discuss here, and there are many things to be done on the level of legal regulation of these issues, because that might be dangerous.
My name is Anthony from University of Houston. I'm a research assistant with the Center of Information Security and Research and Education at the University of Houston. When I see you guys, I'm really very proud. This is the future. I appreciate the effort and the painstaking study you do towards cybersecurity, but I have a little concern, which is, let's face it, as young people, we want to be nowists, we don't want to be futurists. We want to be innovative. We don't want to be restricted. We don't want borders. We just want to use the internet. We don't want the internet of TVs. What do we see as the internet? We don't want internet that is restricted by government or so much of policies. Now, how do we balance this? We want to be innovative. We want to be collaborative. We want to actually sit at any part of the world and know that our voice can be heard. And yet we have these governments and people collaborating to make it look like an internet of borders. As young people, what do you think our major priorities should be when we think about the internet of the future, combined with our exuberance and our intention to always want to innovate? That is one part of my question. The second part of my question is, as young individuals growing in the cyber world, what do you think the internet will look like in the future? Is it more of thinking about cyber security, or is it more of what she said, which is privacy? Are we going to be more concerned about what is being done with our data, the security to our PIIs, and young people are actually thinking of having their own keys with them right now. So are we going to be thinking towards that extent, or are we going to be building more trust on the internet? Thank you.
Those are some great questions, and actually, specifically the first question is a very insightful comment that I've actually noticed doing cyber policy, and it's that we often tend to put words around what the internet is that don't really define what it is or is going to be. So we say, the internet drives innovation, right? But in reality, especially the people that have sort of the generation growing up using it, we don't think, that new app is cool innovation. We just use it, right? We just use WhatsApp. And the internet is like this thing and this resource. And in cyber policy, we look at these different frameworks and try to apply the internet back to our existing models. But in reality, you're very right, is that the future generations beyond us are going to see this as air and water to largely a degree. And they're not going to say, is this water specifically bottled, or is it coming out of the tap? They're just going to drink it, right? And so I think that goes to one of an interesting comment that you had, Oleg, about what part of the internet is actually a common good, and what part is specifically focused and nationalized, and whether or not those boundaries that we put on the internet are something that's actually going to last.
Just comment to your comment, and probably that might be relevant to the question. Well, it's a good question what the internet will look like in 10 years in the future. There is no answer, because the question implies research and answers on the whole totality of the layers on which the internet itself exists, because there are many layers. There is content layer, there is network layer, there is other layers of the infrastructure starting from the physical layer. There's cables and protocols for wireless transmission of data and so on. So I could try to provide only a small piece of the answer in the architectural sense, that it is most probable that in the future the internet will be just a basis, a platform, and it will coexist with a great number of parallel networks, independent networks, corporate networks created by vendors of smart devices for their customers, global networks dedicated to one purpose, to provide client support for those billions or even greater numbers of smart devices. And those corporate networks would not be necessarily connected to the internet. Well, still the global internet will continue to exist, but it will just, the whole picture of computer networks in the world will be more diverse. There would be more parallel projects